Dziękuję. Marcin. Did I get any of that right? Hi, everybody. I'm Bob. Thank you for inviting me to your lovely city. This is my first trip to Poland, but my grandparents were from here, so in a way, it's kind of a homecoming for me. I'm not a TV guy. I'm an advertising agency guy, but please don't hold that against me. My job this morning is to do a little reality check and to see if what we're being told about advertising and marketing and media and consumer behavior is true or if it's what we call in America bullshit. The title of my talk, which is also the title of my most recent book, is Marketers Are From Mars, Consumers Are From New Jersey. Now, some of you may know that Mars and New Jersey are very different kinds of places. One is an uninhabitable, desolate, lonely world, and the other one is a planet. The premise of my talk is that marketers have lost touch with reality and are living in a dream world of their own invention. Over 10 years ago, the marketing industry and the advertising press, and to some extent the popular business press, developed a narrative. The narrative went something like this: the web is going to change everything. Television is going to die. Online advertising is going to be much more effective because it's interactive. Consumers are going to be online, joining the conversation about brands and expressing their brand enthusiasms. Consumers are going to want to engage with brands and seek brand relationships. And this would all be led by a generation of people called millennials, who would wield unprecedented economic power. In fact, almost all of this has turned out to be complete nonsense, but it hasn't changed the narrative one bit. The same baloney we were hearing 10 years ago, we are still hearing today, despite the facts. The result of this is that advertisers are wasting billions of dollars on ineffective fantasies. Now, as you know, I'm from another country and I'm not an expert on marketing or advertising here in Poland, but I speak all over the world and I hear the same things. And I'm sure there are some differences between the issues facing you here in Poland and the US, but I would be very surprised if they're very big differences. It looks to me like the average American is just a Pole with a silly haircut and a gun. I believe that the marketing industry worldwide is suffering from three delusions. They are the digital delusion, the brand delusion, and the age delusion. All of these delusions have one thing in common. They take a little bit of truth and they distort it, exaggerate it, and torture it to the point at which it does marketers more harm than good. Before we get to the delusions, though, let me tell you a little bit about myself so you know what kind of crazy fool you're hearing this from. I spent 41 years in the agency business. You think you're full of shit? I have a Lifetime Achievement Award. I started my career as a copywriter, and through a series of mishaps, I wound up as CEO of 2 independent agencies and the US arm of an international agency. Before I began in advertising, I was a science teacher. There were only 2 problems with that. 1, I don't know anything about science, and 2, I don't like children. I later went on to spend 1 year as the special assistant to the executive director of the California Academy of Sciences. One of the things that being around science and scientists taught me was a healthy respect for the scientific method. Scientists have to go through years of experimentation and peer review before an idea of theirs is accepted. After years of scrutiny, if their results hold up, they can say they actually know something. Knowing something, it turns out, is completely different from thinking you know something. So then I got into the advertising business, and the first thing that struck me was that we really didn't seem to know anything. We thought we knew a lot of things. We had ideas about what makes good advertising. We had ideas about changing consumer behavior, but I couldn't find too many facts. All I could find were the assertions and opinions of experts masquerading as facts. We did things that looked and sounded like science. We used the language and the tools of science. We had questionnaires and computer programs, but we didn't use the scientific method. We rarely used controls for our research. We never repeated our studies to verify them. We never had peer review of our methods or our conclusions. We never asked third parties to replicate our studies to validate them. Now, I'm not blaming researchers for this. It's not their fault that the ad industry isn't willing to pay for real science. But over time, it led me to develop a bad habit. I stopped believing advertising and marketing experts. I don't care what their credentials are. I don't care how many awards they've won. If they don't have the facts and they can't explain it to me in simple, clear language, I'm sorry, I'm skeptical. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman said it best. Science, he said, is the belief in the ignorance of experts. One of the problems with advertising experts is that they have a free pass. They go around to conferences, and they talk to the press, and they write books and articles, and they make profound and confident statements about our industry. And no one ever goes back and checks up on them. Well, today we're going to do a little of that. Now, as you well know, there have been amazing changes in technology and media and communication. And these changes were supposed to bring radical changes to consumer behavior. But as far as I can tell, they've affected our businesses and our work environments far more than they have affected the purchasing habits of average people. Most people still go to the grocery store a few times a week. They still buy cars at the dealership. They still go out to restaurants. They still annoy me at coffee shops. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, in the third quarter of 2016, about 8% of retail activity occurred online. 92% occurred in a store. According to eMarketer, about 1.5% of consumer purchases are made on a smartphone. 98.5% are not made on a smartphone. And yet, if you were to read the literature of our industry, you would have to believe we buy everything online and mostly on our mobile devices. Now, my wife is a Buddhist, and she tells me that in Buddhism, there is something called the Eightfold Path. These, as I understand them, are 8 principles about living better. And the very first of the 8 principles is to see the world as it really is and rid yourself of fantasies and delusions. So that's one of the other things we're going to try and do this morning. I'm going to focus on the 3 delusions I mentioned a moment ago that I believe are significantly responsible for our estrangement from reality. The first delusion is the digital delusion. From an advertising standpoint, at the core of the digital delusion is the belief that online advertising is more effective than traditional advertising because it's interactive. For many years, online advertising was called interactive advertising until it became clear that nobody was interacting with it. And then suddenly the term interactive was dropped and it became display advertising. In fact, display ads have a click rate of about 6 in 10,000. This is not interactivity. This is absence of interactivity. Solve Media, a company that measures this stuff, says you are more likely to complete Navy SEAL training than click on a banner ad. The idea that the same consumer who was clicking her TV remote to escape from ads was going to gleefully click her mouse to interact with them is going to go down as one of the great marketing fantasies of all time. But this delusion has led to consequences that no one could have foreseen. As we sit here today, online advertising is a disaster of historical proportions. Fraud is completely out of control. Corruption is rampant. Half of what is paid for is not even visible. It is hated by consumers, doubted by advertisers, barely fruitful for most publishers, and trusted by no one. Let me be specific. According to Imperva, only 52% of traffic on the web is human. The rest are bots, scrapers, hackers, spammers, and other impersonators. Now, not all bots are bad. Nonetheless, the amount of fraud being perpetrated on advertisers by online scammers is astounding. MediaPost says one average botnet can produce 1 billion fraudulent online ad impressions a day, and nobody knows how many botnets there are. The recent discovery of the meth bot, stealing $1 billion a year from advertisers and publishers, was a shock to almost everyone except the people who know about online ad fraud. The meth bot scam created phony websites masquerading as The Economist, ESPN, Vogue, Fortune, Fox News, and sold billions of fraudulent video views to some of the world's largest, most sophisticated advertisers. Advertisers who had probably been assured by their agencies that the traffic they were buying was 100% fraud-free and legitimate. According to the Interactive Advertising Bureau, online ad fraud will reach at least $7 billion this year. But the problem is the IAB has an interest in understating the extent of the fraud. The World Federation of Advertisers, on the other hand, says ad fraud could easily be 4 to 6 times that number. Perhaps the most mind-blowing study on ad fraud was done by cybersecurity firm Oxford Biochronometrics last year. They bought ads on 4 platforms: Google, Yahoo, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And then they analyzed the traffic they got over a 7-day period. Here are the results. The red areas are real humans. All the rest are different varieties of bots. The incidence of fraudulent traffic ran between 88% and 98%. Now, is this study valid and representative? I don't know. I have a hard time believing that fraud levels are this high. But the problem is, nobody knows. We think we know how to detect bots, but the bad guys have become very adept at mimicking human behavior with bots. Regardless of what they tell you, nobody knows what's real and what's fraud in online advertising. And remember, the fraudsters that get discovered are the ones who aren't very good. The good ones go undetected. If you want to make a lot of money quickly, get into the ad fraud business. Here's a chart from Hewlett-Packard showing why ad fraud is so popular. It has the highest return of any online criminal activity, and essentially no one is ever prosecuted for it. This one will blow your mind. According to the World Federation of Advertisers, within 8 years, Ad fraud may be the second largest source of criminal activity in the world after drug trafficking. Despite this, agencies and marketers are pouring more and more money into online display advertising. Why? Because agencies are making a lot of money. Have a look at this chart, once again from the World Federation of Advertisers. And it tells you, what it tells you is that before the fraud enters the money stream over here, the agencies and the ad tech companies have already taken their slice of the pie. Ad fraud costs them nothing. In fact, they're profiting from it. And it's not just fraud. Hello. Here we go. Okay. And it's not just fraud. According to the Association of National Advertisers, corruption and kickbacks are, quote, pervasive among agencies. The people who are getting killed are the advertisers and the publishers. According to The Guardian, and confirmed by the World Federation of Advertisers, between 60 and 70% of display dollars are going to ad tech middlemen. We keep reading great things about online advertising, don't we? Online advertising is going to surpass TV advertising this year in the US. It keeps growing by double digits every year. So what's going on? Well, in 2016, online advertising spending grew 19%, but that's a very misleading number. In fact, for everyone except Google and Facebook, online ad revenues actually fell between 2 and 5%, depending on whose numbers you want to believe. Google grew about 23%, Facebook grew about 68%, and everyone else dropped by 2 to 5%. Outside of China, Google and Facebook are taking in about 72% of all online ad revenue, while millions of other online publishers are fighting over the scraps. This is the biggest media duopoly in history, and it's growing. According to Digital Content Next, 90% of the growth in online advertising went to Facebook and Google in 2016. If a duopoly like this existed in the broadcast world, my government would break it up in a heartbeat. But no one wants to get mixed up in the cesspool that's online advertising. But you say, how can the online advertising business be in trouble? It's so much more efficient than traditional advertising, right? With the precision targeting of digital advertising enabled by the huge amount of data that's collected through tracking, we can reach the right person at the right time with the right message, right? Well, for years I've been arguing against that logic. In 2012 I wrote, big brands need big reach, not the diminishing returns of finer and finer targeting. In 2013 I wrote, one of the great benefits of mass media is that it lacks precision targeting. It reaches all the users in your category. In 2014 I wrote, have you ever wondered how McDonald's and Coke and Nike and Toyota and all the other enormous worldwide brands became successful? They didn't have big data or precision targeting, so they had to use mass media and talk to everyone. Not only did they not suffer from it, they prospered from it. Well, I guess I must have been way out of touch because in 2013, the CEO of Procter & Gamble, the world's largest advertiser, told us that digital is incredibly effective, and we're doing more. By then, Procter & Gamble had moved over 1/3 of its ad dollars online. In 2014, Procter & Gamble's CFO told us that, quote, effectiveness and the consumer impact of our advertising spending will be well ahead of the prior year because of an optimized media mix with more digital, more mobile, more search, and more social presence. And what has been the result of all this precision, targeted, optimized digital brilliance? In a 12-month period ending in July, Procter & Gamble's sales dropped an astounding 8%. That means they lost $6 billion in sales. P&G shocked the marketing world a few months ago by announcing that they were discontinuing their precision-targeted advertising on Facebook. P&G's chief marketing officer said, "We targeted too much." And P&G isn't alone. According to Coca-Cola's global marketing chief, the ROI on TV is almost twice that of digital. Now, I'm sure there are people here who disagree with me about the power of online advertising, so I'd like to invite you to become a scientist. Don't believe a word I say. Do your own experiment. Go to the biggest supermarket in your neighborhood. Walk up and down the aisles. Take out a piece of paper and write a list of all the products and all the brands you can find that were built by online advertising. All the brands of toothpaste and beer and cereal and soap and soda and snacks and cheese and shampoo. I think you'll find what I found. You have a blank piece of paper. Sure, there are some web-native brands that online advertising has built, Amazon and Netflix. But how about the overwhelming majority of brands that don't live on the web? Where are the brands of beer and soda and fast food and cars and refrigerators and snacks that were built by online advertising? There's something remarkable about the phenomenal success of Apple. Despite being history's most successful technology company and one of the world's most successful online transactional marketers, almost all of Apple's advertising money is spent in traditional media. It's overwhelmingly TV and outdoor and print. And what have the wizards of marketing and advertising learned from Apple? Nothing. But for over 10 years, the experts have been promising us the death of television. Let's have a look at just a tiny sample. An article entitled, "Let's Just Declare TV Dead and Move On" in TechCrunch said, quote, "The writing is on the wall. People want to see the whole show on YouTube. There's a fundamental shift in consumer behavior going on." They wrote that in 2006. From Wired magazine, "Traditional TV won't be here in 7 to 10 years. That was 10 years ago. From The Telegraph 10 years ago, "TV is dying," says Google expert. Fox News wrote, "The internet is set to revolutionize television within 5 years. That was 10 years ago. In 2013, Business Insider falsely reported that TV viewing had dropped 50%. Then in 2015, they falsely reported that TV viewing was falling off a cliff. Now let's look at the facts. Despite the brilliance of all these experts, in the third quarter of 2016, about 93% of all video viewing by adults was done on a television in the US. 84% of it was live and about 9% time shifted. 3% was done on a multimedia device like an Apple TV or a Roku. 4% was done on a PC, and less than 1% was done on a smartphone. Between 2015 and 2016, live TV viewing dropped from 4 hours and 7 minutes a day to 4 hours and 6 minutes a day. Oh my God, it's falling off a cliff. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, watching TV exceeds all other leisure activities combined. According to ThinkBox in the UK, the average person sees about 150 times as much advertising on television as she does on YouTube. I think Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, was a lot closer to reality a while back when he said, "We're in a golden age of television." It's been over 10 years since we started hearing the nonsense about the death of television, and yet every company in creation is now hysterically scrambling to own a piece of the television pie. Apple is, Amazon is, Hulu is, Yahoo is, Netflix is, Google is. Now, as you well know, people are accessing TV in new and different ways. But as ThinkBox says, TV isn't dying, it's having babies. The next delusion I want to talk about is the brand delusion. I believe that creating a strong brand should be every marketer's primary objective. And the highest goal of advertising is to create a strong brand. I'm sure most of you agree. But our industry has taken these truths and hideously distorted them into silly fantasies. There's a widespread fantasy in our business that consumers are in love with brands, that consumers want to have brand conversations and brand relationships and be personally engaged with brands and read branded storytelling and co-create with brands. Let's listen to Saatchi and Saatchi's description of what they call love marks. They reach your heart as well as your mind, creating an intimate, emotional connection that you just can't live without. It's very touching. Unfortunately, it's horseshit. In fact, according to a study by Havas Media in Europe and the US, people would not care if 92% of brands disappeared. Now, one consequence of all this baloney is that we've spent almost 10 years and billions of dollars on the social media fantasy, asking people to join the conversation about brands. What I want to know is what conversation? All you have to do is go to your Facebook page, and if you can read, you can see that no one is having a conversation about brands. I think Coca-Cola's global marketing chief, Marcos de Quinto, said it best. Social media is the strategy for those who don't have a digital strategy. In a study by Duke University, the American Marketing Association, and Deloitte Consulting, over 88% of senior marketers surveyed said they could find no measurable impact from social media marketing. A study by Forrester Research reported that only 0.07%, that's 7 in 10,000 of a major brand's Facebook followers ever engage with one of its posts. On Twitter, the number is even lower, about 4 in 10,000. And remember, this isn't for consumers in general. This is just for the tiny percent of the population who already turned themselves in and became followers of the brand. And yet there are people in our business who believe that consumers are in love with brands. You go to their Twitter profile, "I'm passionate about brands." You're what? Dude, get a fucking girlfriend. Now, once again, let me state the obvious. Yes, having a strong brand should be every marketer's primary objective. And yes, the highest goal of advertising is to create a strong brand. But that's it. No, for the most part, consumers are not in love with brands. Despite all the baloney we hear from social media experts, for the most part, consumers do not want to have a conversation with your brand or an authentic relationship with it or engage with it or dance with it or have a romantic seaside weekend with it. Of all the factors relating to consumer behavior, probably none is more characterized than brand love. If you're a marketer and you believe that people love your brand because they happen to buy it, you're in trouble. Most of what we call brand love is simply habit, convenience, mild satisfaction, or easy availability. Now, are some consumers strongly attached to a few brands? Sure we are. We all are. But remember, we each participate in hundreds of product categories and are strongly attached to maybe a handful of brands. I promise you, if Pepsi would disappear tomorrow, most Pepsi loyalists would switch to Coke with very little psychological damage. Nike loyalists would throw on a pair of Adidas without having to enter rehab, and Big Mac lovers would cheerfully eat a Whopper without the need for counseling. You see, people have a lot of things to care deeply about. They have shaky jobs and unstable families. Some have illnesses. Most have debts. They have washing machines that are broken and cars that need a tune-up and funny things growing on their backs and boyfriends who are always high. I think it's very wise to assume that they don't care deeply about our mufflers, our wet wipes, and our frozen chicken strips. In fact, a smart marketer believes that no one gives a flying damn about her brand. She assumes she has to prove its value to her customers every day of the year. She takes nothing for granted. She does not believe that there are masses of brand ambassadors out there in cyberland advocating for her brand. If there are some, great, but she's not going to count on it. She does not delude herself into believing that there are legions of people who want to engage with her brand or share her brand stories. If there are some, great, but she's not going to bet the future on it. For a smart marketer, every day is Groundhog Day. Every day you have to get up, drag your ass to work, and remind the world once again why they should buy your stuff. The point is this: our brands are very important to us marketers and not that important to most consumers. Finally, we have one last delusion I want to talk about, and that is the age delusion. One of the practices of the ad industry that I've never understood is why we spend so much of our time, money, and energy talking to young people and so little talking to older people. I always assumed there were some pretty good facts to justify this, and somewhere I just hadn't run into them. So about 4 years ago, when I retired from my agency, I had time on my hands and I started to look into this. And what I've seen and what I have read lead me to believe that we don't know what we think we know. In fact, I've come to believe that most marketers target young people because they see everyone else doing it. And they assume that somewhere there must be someone who knows why the hell we're doing this. In other words, somewhere at the end of all this, there's a smart person with facts. Well, if there is, I haven't found her yet. Here's what I have found. According to Nielsen, people over 50 are the most valuable generation in the history of marketing. In the United States, they're responsible for over 50% of all consumer spending. They outspend the average consumer in nearly every category: food, household furnishings, entertainment, personal care, automotive, on and on. They account for 55% of all consumer packaged goods sales, and they dominate 94% of all consumer packaged goods categories. They outspend other adults online 2 to 1 on a per capita basis. They have a net worth about 3 times that of other generations. They buy about 50% of all new cars. They control about 70% of the wealth in the United States. If they were their own country, people over 50 in the United States would be the 3rd largest economy in the world. Bigger than India, bigger than Japan, bigger than Germany. And the future, between now and 2030, the population of adults over 50 will grow at about 3 times the rate of adults under 50. Let me ask you a question. Do you really think it's a good idea to ignore these people? And yet, people over 50 are the target for about 10% of marketing activity in the US. Instead, we're hysterically focused on millennials. In Australia, a study by Professor Mark Ritson showed that for every published article about any other demographic group, there are 42 articles about millennials. While everyone in marketing and media is obsessed with millennials, we are actually going through one of the greatest demographic changes in human history, and it's being completely ignored. This chart from the United Nations demonstrates an astounding demographic change that's occurring in just 100 years. In the year 1950, there were 3 times as many people in the world under 5 as there were over 65. By 2050, there will be twice as many people in the world over 65 as there are under 5. Our population is aging at a remarkable rate. But we have invented all kinds of convenient bullshit for why we ignore mature people. The real reason we ignore older people is we hate them. The marketing and advertising industries hate mature people. We like the excitement of youth, not the boredom of middle age and the frailties of old age. We can't build ourselves a hot advertising career by talking to old farts. Consequently, we have invented all kinds of baloney to justify our malpractice. While the over 50 adult population of the US is 42%, the over 50 population of the advertising industry is under 6%. Our neglect of mature consumers and our pandering to young people is nothing but narcissism disguised as strategy. It's marketing by selfie stick. I guess Forbes summed it up best. People over 50, they said, are the most ignored, wealthy people in the history of marketing. Okay, I'm almost done here, so what are we to make of all this? What does all this mean? Despite our veneer of creativity, the advertising and marketing business is one of the most imitative and conformist businesses in the world. Once an idea becomes trendy, it is very difficult and, in fact, dangerous for someone to go against the grain. I could never have said to my clients 4 years ago, when I was the CEO of an agency, what I am saying to you here today. It would have been too dangerous. Are things changing? Of course things are changing. Things are always changing. I'm not saying we should ignore online advertising. I'm not saying we should ignore people. What I'm saying is we need to get some perspective back and get over our obsessions and delusions. We need to stop falling for the exaggerated, irresponsible baloney that has been sold to us by people with an ideological or financial interest in creating hysteria and promising miracles. Here's my advice. Don't listen to big mouths like me. Give yourself the wonderful freedom of skepticism. Dig up the facts for yourself. Nobody is smarter than the facts. I am dismayed that my industry, which is supposed to be creative and forward-thinking, has been operating on unreliable principles and fanciful delusions that have been sold to us by people who have been wrong over and over. The marketing and advertising industry has been spending too much time on another planet. We need to get back down to earth. Thank you very much.